So let me start with a pretty provocative question. What if the next huge American economic stimulus wasn't about green energy or some tech revolution, but was actually a massive nationwide deportation machine?
It sounds like something out of science fiction, right?
Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack a speculative theory from a podcast monologue that explores exactly that. It's a concept the speaker calls the deportation industrial complex.
The entire theory we're diving into today really hinges on answering this one question. You see, the source monologue kicks off with a pretty stark idea that for the U.S. economy, war has always been a massive engine for growth. Think about it. It creates expensive products that are literally designed to be destroyed, like weapons and ammo, and it clears land for redevelopment. So the question is, if you wanted to avoid foreign wars, how on earth could you replicate that kind of economic jolt right here at home?
All right, so the speaker's argument unfolds in 5 key stages. First, we're going to look at the economic problem itself. Then, we'll get into the proposed solution, this deportation industrial complex. After that, we'll check out a pretty controversial historical comparison, see how this whole thing could escalate, and finally, we'll explore the finger trap mechanism that supposedly makes it all work.
Okay, first up, the core problem. According to the speaker, it's all about one thing: finding a domestic project that is big enough, truly massive enough, to replace the economic engine of a foreign war. The argument here is that the need for a huge national project isn't just about jobs. It's about replacing an entire economic cycle that's built on expensive stuff that gets used up. Things like bombs and tanks. These items are designed to be destroyed, which guarantees there's always more demand. So the theory goes that without this cycle, you need a new, massive internal consumer of goods and services to keep the economy churning.
And this is what leads us to the monologue's central and, most controversial idea, the proposed solution to that economic problem, something the speaker calls the deportation industrial complex.
Now here's the crucial twist in the theory. The main goal isn't necessarily just about immigration enforcement. It's about creating a gigantic domestic make-work program. The speaker imagines it as an evolution of the private prison system we have now, but just scaled up to an absolutely incredible degree to handle the logistics of detaining and deporting millions and millions of people.
Just look at the economic engine this would supposedly create. The speaker describes it as a totally self-sustaining system. You're not just building a few detention centers. We're talking about hiring thousands of new agents, lawyers, and judges. You're manufacturing fleets of vehicles, weapons, and security systems. You're signing huge contracts for food, medical supplies, transportation. You can see from this list, it would create this massive feedback loop that touches almost every part of the economy. And to put this into perspective, the source points to the nearly $4 billion the government already spends every year on private prisons. But in this theory, that number isn't the finish line, it's just the pilot program. It's the model for a system that would be exponentially larger and way, way more expensive.
So what would be the philosophical justification for a project like this? How would you sell it? Well, the speaker draws this really controversial historical parallel, framing the whole idea as a kind of dark reflection of one of America's most famous government programs. The speaker actually calls this concept of bizarro New Deal, and you can see why on the slide here. Where FDR's program was a make-work project for modernization, building dams, roads, and so on, this complex is framed as a domestic make-war project for national security. The source even goes so far as to reframe the original New Deal as a kind of gentrification project while casting this new project's purpose as a response to a so-called internal invasion. The battlefield basically shifts from overseas to inside the country's own borders.
And this is where the theory takes an even darker turn. The argument is that the mission wouldn't just stop with deportation. See, once you build an infrastructure this vast and this expensive, it's just too powerful to be used for only one thing.
This leads to what the speaker calls the next phase, the domestic war on terror. The argument is that the definition of a threat would inevitably expand. The exact same system built to find and deport migrants could then, very easily, be turned against its own citizens. Protesters, activists, really any group that gets labeled a domestic threat.
The predicted chain of events is laid out pretty clearly here. First, you launch these large-scale deportation missions. That, in turn, triggers massive protests from citizens. Then, the state simply reclassifies those protesters as a threat to national security. And just like that, the huge machine you built for deportation now has a brand new target, its own dissenting population.
So how on earth would this escalation be justified? The speaker uses a really simple but powerful analogy to explain the mechanism they believe would drive this whole process forward.
You've probably seen one of these before, right? A Chinese finger trap. It's a simple little toy, but the principle behind it is absolutely key here. The harder you pull your fingers out, which is the most intuitive way to resist, the tighter the trap gets.
And that's the core of the analogy. The speaker argues this system is a trap that's specifically designed to provoke a reaction. Every protest, every march, every act of defiance, it all becomes the justification for an even stronger, more aggressive response from the state. In this view, resistance doesn't actually challenge the system, it fuels it. It gives the state the very pretext it needs to escalate.
The speaker argues this isn't some accidental outcome, but a deliberate strategy they call a provocation environment. The whole point is to bait your opponents into reacting, which then justifies a response you had planned all along. As the quote from the source says, it is a trap to provoke more violence so that they can respond with more retaliation.
And so, that's the theory of the deportation industrial complex in a nutshell. It starts as a really stark answer to an economic problem. How do you create a war-sized stimulus without an actual war? But in the speaker's telling, it quickly morphs into this self-perpetuating system of domestic control. A system that actually feeds on the very resistance it's designed to create. Which leaves us with a final, pretty unsettling question. Can something be an economic stimulus and a system of control, all at the very same time?